All right. Again, thank you for being here. We're very thankful to the Friends of OLLI. And then I do want to stop real briefly for a polling question. One of the reasons or one of the ways that we get our funding is by our membership. We need to have 1,000 members every year. We're about 802 members right now. And so my question to you is, are you a current OLLI member? So if you can just take a minute and answer that question, that would be great. That would be super helpful for us. So I'm going to leave that question up for just a second. And like I said, we're currently at about 802 members for this year. And you can see that's quite a significant improvement over the 2021 and 2022 years. So thank you for all of you who are members. We do say our OLLI membership is not prorated. It goes from July 1st each year to June 30th each year. And again, for our funding, we are required to get to 1,000 members each year. So we're in a serious membership recovery mode. So if you're able and you can join us this year, even though you know your membership is going to end in a couple of months, it would be super helpful for us. And it shows the support of lifelong learning in our community. Also, we like to thank our volunteers. They are wonderful. They do so much for OLLI, and this is just 3 of them who were helping at our recent open house, and we're looking forward to our next open house for our summer, which it will be, the open house will be in June. So you'll get more information about that as we get closer. And again, we believe learning should never end. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jane and let her introduce our guest. So thank you all for being here today.
And we appreciate your coming. And of course, if you're on and your partner or spouse isn't on, feel free to encourage them to join, or friends, because there's a lot going on and there are a lot of really good classes. All right, Andrew, we thank for being here today. He's program coordinator for housing and grants at Humboldt County Planning and Building Department. He's lived in Humboldt County since 1999 and has over 15 years of experience working on housing-related projects and programs, and has worked in Humboldt County, the City of Eureka, and the City of Arcata. The Humboldt County Planning and Building Department is responsible for protecting public health, safety, and welfare. The department achieves this through building permit review and inspections consistent with California model codes, as well as planning and development review and approval consistent with the county's general plan. The department also provides administrative and development assistance services. So it's all yours, Andrew. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for that introduction, Jane. And thank you all for coming today. I was putting this presentation together and you're never sure of the audience that you will have. So some of you may think this is too general and others may learn some things that you didn't know. So I'm hoping it'll be a little bit of each for everybody. Let me share my screen. I have a little presentation. Feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. I can answer those questions as we go, or I may also say I'm going to cover that later in the presentation. So don't take offense if that happens.
And people can put them in the chat.
Yes, yeah. If folks want to just put them in the chat, and then I can take a look at those at the end of the presentation. I'm looking for the share screen thing. Here it is. And this share, and I'm sharing, and I got to get the right view here. So
it's working.
Okay, I gotta get the presentation format here. Let's see. Home.
You go up to slideshow.
Slideshow. There it is. Okay. It was behind this little, there we go, slideshow.
It's still not quite right.
Okay.
Yep.
Here we go. Yep.
There you go.
All right. Then it moved. But are you seeing the?
We see your notes too.
Okay. So I need to move this one. Oh, okay.
You can stop sharing and start again. That might be what you need to do.
Yeah, let's see. Okay. Got it. Okay. Where's the stop sharing part? Let's see.
Should be,
Let's stop share. Okay. Sorry, everybody.
it happens. Don't worry. You got this.
Okay. Okay. And from the beginning. And then okay, share screen. Okay, share. And from the beginning. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, sorry. So welcome everybody. This is a little presentation on Humboldt County housing issues, policies, and planning efforts. If you came here today for a deep dive in the Humboldt State student housing situation or the state of homelessness in the county, this may not be the presentation for you. I work for the Humboldt County Planning and Building Department, and we focus our efforts on land use entitlements for housing. And we also write and administer grants for housing projects and programs that are targeted towards permanent housing and not necessarily, services for people experiencing homelessness or and also in the unincorporated areas of the county. So we our jurisdiction is everywhere outside the city limits in Humboldt County. Humboldt County, of course, is a land area that is slightly smaller than the state of Connecticut. And it's got a diverse set of regions and communities, as well as the 7 cities. So I'm just going to start with some housing terms for folks that may not have heard some of these things before. First, and this is loosely alphabetical order, but that'll fall apart as we get towards the end. Accessory dwelling units are complete independent living facilities for one or more person on the same lot as a primary structure. And these are also known as garden apartments or granny flats. And this has emerged as a kind of a statewide effort to increase the supply of housing units. And it does so by creating essentially 2 housing units where there was only 1 before. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more later. Affordable housing is generally housing that's affordable when a person is spending less than 30% of their gross household income on housing, including rent, mortgage, principal, insurance, all that. And affordable housing obviously will be different depending on where you live and the amount of income that you have for your household. Area median income is a term specifying essentially how much money you earn or your income if you have other source of income. And that's the halfway point on a defined area's income gradient. So the area median income for Humboldt County is specified in this chart here, and this is generated by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, and it kind of guides the implementation of our housing developments and programs for different income tiers. And you can see the median income for a single person in the county is $56,200. And then we also look at, and this doesn't show it, but the top of this column should be number of people in the household. So the first column is 1 person, 2 person, 3 people, 4 people. So a 4-person household, their median income would be $80,300 in Humboldt County. And like I said, it's going to differ from city to city, and county to county in the state. This is important because, and you'll often hear percent of AMI, area median income. So the first row is the acutely low income folks, and that's 15% of the area median income. And then we go down, and then we're on 30% is extremely low income. 50% of the area median income is considered very low, and then low income is 80% of the median. And these income groups would potentially qualify for different programs or housing units depending on their income. Some other terms, tiny house. Tiny house is kind of a blanket term that's applied in a lot of different ways. But essentially, did I hear a question?
Hello.
No. Okay. But if it's going to be a permitted unit, it needs to meet state and local zoning codes and will be considered permanent housing. However, some folks, you may have seen them around town, have essentially a trailer with a house on top. If it's a movable unit, then it would be registered with the California Department of Motor Vehicles. So anyway, you'll hear people talk about tiny home villages and various things, very similar in a lot of ways to a manufactured home park, of which we have 53 in the unincorporated county. And manufactured home parks are an important source of affordable housing. Mixed income housing is essentially mixing the income levels of the residents in a development. Housing rehabilitation is the practice of repairing or restoring housing to keep it in the housing stock. Infill development refers to the process of developing vacant or underutilized parcels within existing, well, this says incorporated areas, but it could be unincorporated areas. And the difference there is incorporated is in the city, unincorporated is outside of the city limits, unincorporated areas. So infill can occur in both inside and outside the city. So that term is a little messed up. Permanent supportive housing is a term you will hear in regards to housing for folks that are unable to essentially manage their affairs and live on their own. So that could be in the shape of mental health counseling or medical care provision. And this is often seen with folks that are coming out of homelessness and they need wraparound support services to maintain their stable housing situation. Housing first is a term that refers to putting folks in housing before we address issues like mental health, substance use, or other issues. And it's a strategy where the housing comes first and then the other issues are addressed at that point. Market rate housing, of course, is just your standard housing where the market, supply, demand, sets the cost to the occupant, and there are no public subsidies. Okay, so getting a little more specific, we're going to talk about the Humboldt County housing conditions. And the question is, how much housing is in Humboldt County and where is it? So this table shows the population in the county, and oh, well, this is, oh, okay, I think, yeah, all right. So this is 2022, and then this is 2011. And as you can see, in that 10-year period, the county population went down slightly. And so that may be surprising to some because we are in the midst of a serious housing crunch, where housing is sought after and more people want housing than have it. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but you can see the breakdown of our 7 cities. Eureka being the largest, Arcata, Fortuna, Rio Dell, Ferndale, Blue Lake, and then Little Trinidad. Down here, we have the unincorporated residents. So these are people that live outside the city limits, and they are the majority of Humboldt County residents. And so that would include areas like McKinleyville, Myrtletown, Cutton, Lolita, Scotia, Garberville, Redway, Manila. There's a lot of unincorporated communities in Humboldt County, Willow Creek, Oric. And by the way, McKinleyville, I think, is the largest unincorporated community in the state of California. And its population is getting close, is somewhere between the population of Fortuna and Arcata. And that is the county jurisdiction area. So where are the housing units? This table shows the breakdown on the units. Arcata with 8,000 units, Eureka with a little over 12,000. In the county, there is 35,000, give or take, units. And again, the county unincorporated area has the largest proportion of housing units in the county, or including the cities. So we've got about 63,000 housing units, and this is all types. And this data comes from the California Department of Finance. And they provide us with a great deal of information regarding population and housing units. So just if you wanted to poke around on their website, it's the California Department of Finance Bureau of Statistics, I believe. Okay, let's talk about vacancy rates. When we have a shortage, we're wondering, why are there vacant units? And again, this data comes from the California Department of Finance. And as you can see, the vacancy rate in the county is 13.4%, with a total of 4,693 units that are vacant. And why are those vacant? Well, we don't really have good data on why. We think that a lot of them are investment properties. I've been told that this number does not include, the Airbnbs, the vacation rentals, things like that. So it is a bit of a mystery why our vacancy rate is essentially 2 times really what it should be in a normal housing market. Normally, it's it's about between 6 and 7% vacancy rate. And Trinidad obviously is not doing a great job with 27% of their units vacant, but this does represent a significant amount of housing that is not actually being put to the use of housing. Various people have talked about enacting ordinances to tax vacancy. And I know that's been on the Eureka City Council agenda, maybe Arcata as well. Arcata is doing pretty well. They have a 4.4% vacancy rate. But any, intervention in the market could potentially have some unintended consequences. So, it's hard to tell how an ordinance would fare, and would it be implemented in such a way to solve the problem. Let me see. I'm going to just check and see if we have any chats. Yeah. So Mark Ellis asked, are vacation homes considered vacant? Yeah. So if, say, your primary residence was in San Francisco and you owned a home in Trinidad and you came up there on weekends or for vacations, that would be considered vacant. Now, where's the border between vacant and occupied? I am not precisely sure, but I have heard that active vacation rentals are not considered vacant. But good question. Okay. All right. So how did we get to a situation that we're in now where people are homeless and needing housing and the cost of housing are rising and folks can't find places to live? Well, we can talk a little bit about legacy conditions that got us into this situation. And essentially, our housing conditions were shaped by zoning concepts established at the dawn of the automobile era. Back in the 1920s, there was an effort to apply land use regulations to prevent incompatible and unsafe uses. You know, the classic, you don't put the fireworks factory next to the daycare, for instance, you know, things like that. But at the time, the simplest way that they could conceptualize this was to just keep like uses separated from each other in zones, or uses separated from each other in zones. And so you had residential areas, and then you had business areas, and then you had places for schools, churches, taverns, and all these were in separate zones. And people were, expected essentially to transport themselves in cars between those different uses. And this created a great deal of automobile infrastructure, parking lots, roads, things like that. And essentially we were building for that car dominated culture. Emphasis was placed on single family residences above apartments or mixed use villages or neighborhoods. And the zoning often had, and this has been documented, and I'm not going to go into it too deeply here, but certainly zoning was used to enforce and perpetuate the redlining concept, where certain classes of people and income groups were essentially boxed out of these single family neighborhoods that where you had to be able to afford to buy that house with the land and have the car to get you back and forth to the job and the school and the shopping and all that. So, a lot of current planners, current thinkers in planning are kind of digesting this legacy condition and trying to figure out ways to address this, to create more equity in housing and more diverse types of housing in neighborhoods. So in terms of trends for Humboldt County housing, the trend would be we're generally in a mode in our society nationwide. I think it's pretty safe to say that we're seeing smaller households, whereas in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s even, the standard was husband, wife, children, 4, 5, maybe 6-person household. Now the Humboldt County average household size is around 2.3 persons. So, basically a smaller household, and trends that we're essentially forced to reckon with at this point is we're looking towards more focused development, focused in that we need to develop housing in areas that are served by existing infrastructure. Infrastructure is vastly expensive, and creating new infrastructure to serve ex-urban growth does not pencil anymore. So we are seeking to increase the housing in the areas with existing infrastructure. hazard avoidance and mitigation are key aspects of our planning priorities. Essentially, you may have been out to the Seminole Peninsula and said, well, there's lots of space out here. Why aren't we putting more homes out here? And there's a couple reasons for that. But one of the big ones, of course, is the tsunami inundation hazard. We have been directed not to increase the housing density in those tsunami inundation areas, because those people would be subject to that hazard. And we don't want to take that step. And of course, we need to factor in projected sea level rise, which could be a significant factor. And it is actually already seen in some of our unincorporated communities like King Salmon and Fields Landing down there close to the bay. On high tides and during storm events, they are currently experiencing flooding. And so along with your house key, you may want to leave your house in King Salmon with your hip waders, because you might have to slog through 2 feet of water to get out of there. So in response to that, the consensus is that we really need to factor greenhouse gas reduction into our planning for and development of new housing. And so that comes into play with, state mandated requirements like solar panels on new homes built, but also significantly, where are we going to put this housing? And ideally, we would put this housing where people can walk to school or work, and where they are not subject to, commutes and having to necessarily own a car to live their lives. And this is a major modal shift for people in the county. We've have a strong rural heritage. We are forced to be independent and kind of take care of our own needs up here. And so this is kind of a major change. And this is reflected mostly in the county's climate action plan. And I believe Michael Richardson has presented to this group on that topic. And you could probably go back and take a look for his presentation on the Humboldt County Climate Action Plan. But it is a factor, when you build the housing, it's there for a minimum of 50 years, and whatever impacts are experienced because of that housing, whether transportation impacts or energy impacts, there will be a 50-year legacy there. So we're trying to get smart about where we put the housing and how we build it. And then other trends are, we're finding that obviously there are members of our community that are not able to afford housing at all, and they end up being homeless. And then there's plenty of people that are working and they're unable to afford a rental at the market rate. And so that's a priority action on the part of this department, is to create funding sources or develop funding streams to create subsidized housing for lower income or special needs populations. For example, there is a huge need for housing that is completely accessible to those that, say, use a wheelchair, and or housing for folks that are having age-related disabilities or difficulties with mobility. So those would be examples of special needs populations that we really need to factor in, because it's coming for everybody at some point. Let's see, I have a chat question here. Jane asks about Arcata and Trinidad setting limits for Airbnbs. The county has not set limits. Technically, Airbnbs are not allowed in the county at this point, although there are plenty of Airbnbs that are in the county. So ask how that could that be? Basically, the county will not act until we get a complaint. And then once we get a complaint, we have a code enforcement unit that comes in and addresses that complaint. So there are a lot of Airbnbs that are essentially out of compliance. We are developing an ordinance, but we really do have to thread the needle there between fully cracking down on it and then making people's businesses illegal and impacting their ability to make revenue and bring folks into the county that are here as tourists. So that's pending, and that'll be coming up here in the next couple of months. And I check our messages here. Okay, Jane gave me a little 3-part. The state is requiring. Okay, I'm going to get to the rest of your questions there as we get further along in this presentation, maybe towards the end. Okay, so trends. So rents are up, and the question is, why are rents going up so much? And short answer is there are more households and the same amount of units, and it's kind of a classic supply and demand situation where when the demand outstrips the supply, the price goes up. So this is a little screenshot from an Atlantic article from August of 22. And the author makes the point that after the pandemic, the number of new household formations, in other words, people starting their own household, reached record levels. So during the pandemic, everyone was hunkered down where they were, either living with parents or maybe they were cooped up with a bunch of roommates. And then the pandemic started to wind down, and people all of a sudden, understandably wanted to get their own space. So new household formation as of 22 reached record levels, and there was no corresponding development boom of new units. And so there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, a great deal of uncertainty in the economy, and the cost of materials, labor, all these things rose precipitously during the pandemic. And investors and construction companies were, often hesitant to jump in with both feet and invest in new units. I've heard that housing starts for the single family units are down, whereas multifamily units are up. So if that trend continues, that would, in my opinion, would be a good direction, because with the smaller households, the types of units that I think we're going to see larger demand for in the future are these smaller units for 1, 2, maybe 3 people, whereas a whole single family home may not be the best use of our limited resources in terms of land and infrastructure. That is not to say, though, that people necessarily want that apartment over that single family house. In fact, we did some polling back in 2021 where we asked folks in the county to kind of describe their ideal housing situation. And I believe about 70% described ultimately their desire to own or reside in a single family home. In other words, a detached house on a lot, was kind of the preference among people. And it's understandable. It's what we're used to, and it's what we've been kind of setting up as the ultimate for quite some time. And Jane is I think we're gonna just table Jane's comment till the end, and then we'll maybe get a discussion going once my presentation's over. So what are the goals for the county? And when I say the county, I'm mostly talking about the unincorporated areas. Each city should have its own goals. It's not that they are not complementary of each other, and they may be very similar. But like I said, I work for the county, and the folks with Arcata, Eureka, Fortuna, they may have a different outlook. But we are focused on increasing housing production. We are focused on increasing the diversity of housing types. If you see a new subdivision or large project, we're going to be looking for affordable units, apartments, smaller units, and things like that. Housing diversity. In other words, we're not all coupling up and having 3 to 5 children and doing that type of lifestyle. As our population kind of gravitates to a more European style, birth rates and things like that, we can look to see our household size. I don't know if it's going to continue to decline, but certainly bigger families will be less common, I believe, going forward into the future. Workforce housing is a crucial need. We've, as we saw in the pandemic, we really need people to work at the supermarkets. It's going to be a sad day when you go to the store and you can't buy any food because no one's working there. And it could be a hungry day too. So providing housing that the workers at their wages can afford is a crucial component of our housing planning. We touched on climate policy as housing policy a little bit earlier. This is integral in our planning efforts, and for a lot of people it's causing some heartburn because many folks want to have their ranchette out on 40 acres deep in the timberlands. However, who's going to maintain that road, and who's going to protect that person against fire? Obviously wildfires, as climate change or whatever you want to call it is happening. Fire severity is a major threat to life and human safety. And so this is where we need to kind of reel back our housing policies to provide safe housing, but also housing that is resilient from a climate standpoint, and also reducing that greenhouse gas contribution of the housing unit and the residents. And of course, equity in housing. I kind of mentioned how zoning had been used to keep certain classes of people or races in segregated neighborhoods, and creating equity in housing is a important statewide goal. And in our area, this often means collaborating or assisting tribal entities in creating diverse housing opportunities for folks that are sort of the indigenous and tribal members. So that's kind of a key piece of equity in housing in our area. All right, shifting gears. We talked a little bit of, this is accessory dwelling units. We encourage accessory dwelling units. About 5 years back, the state passed a blanket regulation allowing accessory dwelling units in all residential zones, as long as certain safety standards and setbacks were met. And this kind of opened up an opportunity for folks that have single family homes to create a rental unit on their home. So this is a picture of myself and my son working on an accessory dwelling unit at my house. And this was about 5-6 years ago. And so we developed a little studio apartment that's actually attached to our house with a separate entrance, and it's a private unit, but it's attached to our house. And so a couple years ago, we got a grant to do some community engagement and marketing, as well as create resources to assist people in the county that were looking to develop accessory dwelling units. So the website here, humboldtadu.org, is it's a great website. It's got a accessory dwelling unit guidebook in it. And it's a kind of a really nice resource for folks that are wondering, what can I do to help with the housing crisis? Well, one answer is you could develop, if you own a home or a property, you could develop that home or property with an accessory dwelling unit. And if you have a single family lot now in the state of California, and it's not restricted by things like tsunami inundation or flooding and things like that, you're actually allowed to build 3 units on a parcel that 10 years ago you could only build 1 unit on. So you can build a main house, what's called a junior accessory dwelling unit, and that's what I have, which is a dwelling unit that's attached to a main house, and then an accessory dwelling unit as well, which the only requirement in the county is that it needs to be under 1,200 square feet. And it would be detached, and it would be subject to the standard provisions of our building code. But that's a pretty simple ask, and mostly would just require a standard building permit. Recently, we've launched our accessory dwelling unit loan program. We secured funding from the state of California to make loans to people that are at or below 80% of the area median income. That would be household income. And those loans would pay for the development of an accessory dwelling unit. The loans are fully deferred for 30 years and are 3% simple interest. So what that means is you don't have to make any payments for 30 years. You will accrue 3% interest annually, but you can also pay it back at any time. So it's a way for lower income folks to add a housing unit and generate some income for their household, because we qualify them based on their existing income, not their income after they've built and started renting an accessory dwelling unit out. The county also has pre-reviewed accessory dwelling unit plans. These are somewhat limited in their utility because every site, every location is going to have different opportunities and constraints for the development of a unit. But certainly we have had these plans run through our plan check, and you could take your parcel and create a plot plan showing where you would put this unit on that parcel, and come in and apply for a permit to build the unit. So it's just something we're doing to encourage the development of these accessory dwelling units. We also have the owner occupied rehabilitation loan program. This is a program where we provide preferential rate and term loans to make needed health and safety improvements. On the left, you see kind of the before, and on the right, you see kind of a during photo of the reconstruction of this home out in the community of Manila. This was a fellow that was in his 80s, and basically the house was a complete wreck. And his wife had left him to go live with his daughter, and he refused to go. And this became a code enforcement issue. So you can see the plywood over the windows because people were getting in. It was infested with rats. But we, working with the code enforcement group here at the county, we met with the homeowner, made him a loan, helped develop the plans for the new unit. And a little over a year later, they were moving into essentially a brand new house. And we hope that they maintain it when they pass on. The equity in the house will go to repay their loan. And that's kind of how our program works. Funds are recycled. And this was a nice project because this, before they were burning wood to keep warm, and they had cracks in the walls big enough for the cat to walk through. And like I said, there was rats and garbage and things like that. And we brought them in, and the husband and the wife got back together, and they had a unit where, you know, they didn't have to carry the firewood in, and it was all one level and a safe, secure place for them to live. And it had a what's called an air source heat pump, which is an electric powered efficient heater, and it can also be used to dehumidify, which is quite well suited to our coastal environment. So, and they were very happy to have that heat and insulation and not have the wind blowing through the house. We also have a first-time homebuyer loan program, very similar to the owner-occupied rehab, except we make loans to folks that are first-time home buyers. Unfortunately, the wait list is closed. The state asked us to, well, told us to put our program on hiatus because they realized that the program was no longer functional based on the rapid appreciation in home prices that we've seen. In other words, even with our supplemental loan, these home buyers were not able to purchase homes. So we could reopen this program if the funding and the housing market conditions allow. But it's a way to get folks into homes that otherwise would not be able to afford them. And it's a silent second. So basically they go to a mortgage lender, qualify for their first loan, and then we come in to 95% of that and essentially help them with a big down payment. And again, it's a 30-year fully deferred loan that has 3% interest and is due and payable if the homeowner moves out of the house or sells the house. And then another big thing that we're working on is getting financing together for subsidized housing. In the past couple of years, we've applied to and received funds from the local housing trust fund program with the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Our plans call for providing funding for rental housing for households at or below 60% of the area median income. So you're kind of looking at your lower tier workers or folks that are on Social Security or disability. We also have program income funding. We've been making the loans that I've just previously discussed for over 20 years. And at this point, we've got a $22 million revolving loan fund for those activities and the development of new housing. Currently, we've got about $1 million to apply to a multifamily development project. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that is going. We also have the permanent housing allocation. This is an annual allocation of funding from the state based on a real estate transaction tax. And again, the county decided to apply that to a rental housing project at or below 60% of the area median income. So we're again trying to target creating units for those people in that income group. And if we're talking about financing for subsidized housing, you really need to discuss the low income housing tax credit allocation. Nationwide, this is the largest funding source for subsidized affordable housing in the country. And this is basically, I don't want to call it a tax dodge, but essentially corporations that have large tax liabilities can bid on these credits and essentially defer their tax obligations to their benefit by funding affordable housing. And we also recognize at the county that, much of the county, our resource lands, our floodplains, our high fire risk areas are not suitable for housing for a number of reasons, including transportation, safety, et cetera. And the acknowledgement is that the housing needs to go where the rest of the housing is. And this is often in the cities themselves, Eureka, Arcata, Fortuna. So we've submitted a grant application to establish a regional housing trust fund that could provide funding for subsidized housing, irrespective of jurisdictional boundaries. So if a project came forward in Arcata that was going to meet the program goals, again, I think we're targeting that 60% AMI or below group for rental housing. We could provide funding for that project. And with these funding sources, money attracts money. In other words, for a typical, say, 40 unit housing development, recently I've heard that, a subsidized unit, each unit can clock in at around 600,000 per unit. And you ask, why is so much? Well, when you have a subsidized unit, you have requirements that may not apply to market rate units, including prevailing wages, which drives the cost up somewhat. They're often multi-story developments that require elevators. Obviously, ADA, Americans with Disability Act compliance, is a crucial requirement. But these things can also increase the cost of the projects. So when you're talking affordable housing, we often talk about stacking funding. That 40 unit development might cost $22 million. The county may be able to provide, say, $2 million for a soft loan, which would ride with the property, which could be stacked on top of a traditional hard financing, which would be a mortgage payable upon rental receipts, which would also be stacked upon either a low-income tax credit allocation or potentially through a grant application to the home program, which is a HUD-funded funding source to create rental properties. So it's a complicated financing picture, but if we're going to get the housing for this tier of person or household, that's kind of what we have to do. Okay. Another key kind of resource to folks, and as I mentioned earlier, my internet's not working well, but the Humboldt County WebGIS, it has a wealth of information about planning, zoning, hazards, aerial images, but also details what we call our housing opportunity zones. And housing opportunity zones are areas where we are targeting housing. And these are areas that already have existing community infrastructure. So they have a community service district that provides water and sewer, essentially. And that's going to be kind of your high ticket residential infrastructure that is really unaffordable to develop new facilities at this point. The only other alternative to that is your well and your septic system. Many of the single family residences in the county do have that system, and it's more suited towards a rural lifestyle. But the price point on those well and septic systems put that out of the range of affordability, and also tends to increase the amount of sprawl and resulting climate impacts that we would have from that kind of development. I will, if we have time, after we get through all the questions, I'll get on the WebGIS and kind of show you around a little. Other things that we're doing. We are working on the Humboldt County multifamily rezone project. Essentially, we have a shortage of land that is appropriately planned and zoned for multifamily housing. So the multifamily rezone project is a voluntary program whereby property owners in the unincorporated areas can participate, and the county is going to conduct some of the environmental compliance studies and planning processes to get that land rezoned for multifamily housing apartments. We have very limited supply of land that is available for and developable as apartments. The housing opportunity zones, touched on that a little bit. Those are essentially just areas where we can put new housing in and we don't need new infrastructure for that, generally closer to our urban clusters. And, you know, folks are familiar with McKinleyville, but the county sees that as probably one of the major opportunities for new housing in the unincorporated areas. That downtown area there, kind of near the Safeway, and some of the vacant or underutilized commercial buildings there, large parking lots, etc. There's plenty of space there for housing, and we are working on creating the planning entitlements, essentially the zoning, to allow that new housing in the town center of McKinleyville. This is just a link to the accessory dwelling unit plans that I discussed earlier, where you can look at pre-reviewed plans. And then questions. So we'll just jump into the chat, and let me see. All right, we let's see. All right, so Jane, Jane asks, the state is requiring the building of housing at certain levels and types of housing. How is the county doing in terms of meeting those requirements? And I think what Jane's referring to is the regional housing needs allocation. And that is a process by which the state essentially mandates that jurisdictions and localities generate a certain amount of housing. And I don't have the data prepared on that right now, but if we get to the end and more people want to talk about this, I can poke around and bring that up. But generally, Humboldt County does a good job of providing moderate to higher income housing. We've had a fair number of subdivisions up in McKinleyville and a fair number of new houses built for that home buying sector of the housing population. But we do struggle to meet our needs for our low, very low, and extremely income population, and that's that of the apartments. And the challenges there are one, funding. We're taking steps to address that. We've got about $5 million to attach to an eligible project right now. But kind of the second part of her question comment is, do we have developers interested in building the housing? We have Danco Communities is a prominent one that have really gotten the formula for kind of vertically integrating the development process for affordable housing, and have managed to make quite a business out of that. But we don't, and we have some nonprofit developers in the area that are interested in doing this. But the problem being, we don't have land that is readily planned and zoned for apartments. And we have a lot of commercial land that is vacant. We have lands that are single family zoned that could have apartment complexes, but the zoning is wrong. And if a developer wants to change the zoning, essentially they're opening themselves to a long, expensive process that is vulnerable to what we call the NIMBYs, which are the not in my backyard folks, the folks that want to stop the development of apartments near them because they object to it for various reasons. So what the county needs to do preemptively is rezone that land before the project comes across the door, so the projects have a home where they don't need to enter into a contentious land use planning confrontation. Let's see, everyone is talking about housing crisis. What types of housing are really needed? Is it really mainly student housing, rental housing, or also single family homes for market rate housing? What is the county's attitude towards condos? We don't seem to be building. Okay, Jane, you've asked a lot of questions here. All right, so I'll start with housing crisis. Well, yes, certainly you could say we do have a housing crisis because we have a large percentage of our population is homeless, but that could also be related to addiction, mental illness, and various other issues that are, arguably under funded or emphasized. But as I mentioned earlier, talking about household formation, part of that crisis is a mismatch between the types of units we have, which typically are single family residences, and the types of units we need, which are units for people or smaller households, 1 or 2 unit type apartments. So I think the housing crisis, it's there, but I think it's acute, especially because of the record numbers of new household formations that we've seen in the post-pandemic era. We do have some large proposals which look to shake up our economy and population here in the county. As I mentioned earlier in the proposal, though, from 2011 to 2021, our population we lost about 300 people in the county. So, it's not a clear-cut case of we just don't have enough housing, we've got way too many people. I think it's a combination of factors, but certainly the Cal Poly Humboldt expansion particularly is going to stress the North Bay region, Arcata, and that's why we're definitely prioritizing some development in McKinleyville, which is a short hop down the road from HSU, and ideally that new development will be coupled with some smart transit planning that can get folks to HSU, on a 15-minute bus schedule or something like that. So people can live up in McKinleyville, but have easy access to either where they're working or going to school. But also you will hear people wanting to buy homes and not being able to afford it because the house prices have accelerated so rapidly. And what has caused that rapid acceleration, I don't know, but anecdotally, it seems that we have this concept of digital nomads, people that say had a high-paying job in the Bay and wanted the rural lifestyle up here in Humboldt, came up and work remote. Will that just be a kind of a fad, or is it a ongoing trend? We won't know for many years to come. I often say I can't see the future. If I could, I would be relaxing on a boat somewhere with a drink in my hand. So anyway, okay, I'm going to keep going down. What is the county's attitude towards condos? We don't seem to be building them. You're right. And we don't have, this is kind of going back to the heritage zoning issues where the emphasis was on those single family homes. And we don't have a lot of opportunity in our zoning code for condos. The state has made some moves recently with law changes that allow essentially 0 lot line subdivisions. So if you had a residential parcel, and I not 100% clear on these details, but if you have a residential parcel, you may now be able to subdivide that and do a zero lot line subdivision where you could have a condo where the ownership of the land would go with the house with the condo, but the condo could be a connected unit sharing a wall. But that's, again, I'm a little out of my depth on that. And same with the housing co-ops. This is it certainly is a nice way for people, say, that aren't going to start that 4 or 5 person family. Maybe it's just a couple, or maybe it's just someone with their pet, but they want to have ownership because they want to be here for a while and have a secure house where the rent's not going up. And a housing co-op might be a good way for them to achieve that. There's different methodologies that come to mind that I've seen, and most of those have been focused in more urban areas. I saw something in the New York Times about people in the Bronx or Brooklyn where they would create an ownership agreement where someone could own the top 2 stories of a building, and someone would own the bottom stories, and they would have separate ownership, but it would be the same building. So those kind of trends really haven't come to our county yet, but certainly would provide for more diversity in housing types. Is the county enforcing or at least encouraging electrification and solar? We are enforcing and encouraging it, I believe. Solar panels are now required on any new single family home and may be required on certain accessory dwelling units as well. This is great, and also a cost burden. Your initial cost to create the unit goes up because you have to put the panels and the inverters and all the electrical infrastructure in for that solar. Long run, it's great because we're reducing our dependence on fossil fuel generated electricity. But that is part of the Uniform Building Code, and it is something that we're enforcing on new construction. And we are looking to encourage ways to encourage residential electrification. It's interesting. We are getting some pushback from rural landowners that have been doing things a certain way, and maybe they power their house on propane and feel that we should be able to do that on into the future as a solution for providing heat and hot water in the rural areas. The jury's still out on that. Ken asks, what is the impact on infrastructure if water, gas, electric, sewer, if ADUs become prevalent, especially with older infrastructure? That's a good question. And, we have seen essentially a doubling in the past 5 years, each year, of how many permits come across our counter for accessory dwelling units. And are we going to reach essentially the big one here is sewer, because the sewer treatment facilities seem to be the most constrained in terms of capacity. So the question would be, how many ADUs can we build before we overwhelm the wastewater capacity? Water is not as big an issue in our area. We're blessed to have Ruth Lake and industrial heritage here, which we have, millions and millions of gallons of excess water capacity available. But the electric question is a good one, especially in areas like Redway, Garberville, where PG&E is telling us that they can't add new hookups because the infrastructure is just not there. But for a smaller ADU, you're talking about a 60 amp sub panel, and can be tiered off a typical 200 amp service. So, that's not a major constraint. So I would say generally, Ken, the big one's going to be the sewer. And I don't know when we're going to hit that point, but I've not heard that it's coming up anytime soon. Jane asks, how many ADUs have been developed to date? Are people responding to the opportunity and at what rate? Yep. Sorry, Jane, I don't have any firm numbers, but the graph essentially is a 45-degree uptick. I think we had this past year, we had about 100 applications. Prior to that, it was 50. Before that, it was 25. Before that, it was 10. And before that, it was like 5. So it has been doubling every year. And also a lot of the new developments on raw land are now including essentially that maximum density in their initial build. So in other words, they have not built anything yet, but they're going to start with a house with a attached junior accessory dwelling unit and then a detached accessory dwelling unit. So where before you would have had 1 unit, now we have 3. And, I will mention this is causing some heartburn for people that really want to see neighborhoods just homogeneously single family. All of a sudden, you're going to have more people in that neighborhood. And some people are maybe get some heartburn about that, but we need the housing. So, and we got to put it somewhere. Bonnie McGregor, is the county planning to create more infrastructure beyond McKinleyville that would allow the development of additional parts of the unincorporated area? Essentially, probably not. The cost to develop new infrastructure is such that there's no feasible way to provide that infrastructure with the existing ratepayer base. So in my career, I've looked at wastewater treatment options for the communities of Oric, Willow Creek, and well, the town of Samoa would be an outlier example there. But essentially, the cost is too high, and we do need to consider kind of the growth inducing impacts of adding a lot of new homes in areas like Oric, which is challenged with floodplain, tsunami inundation, and honestly, isolation. There's not a lot of employment opportunities up there. It's essentially a historic logging community that is, losing people. But so no, there's no big plans for new infrastructure. I think the focus now is bolstering, maintaining, and improving the infrastructure that we currently have. Will you show us how to view the opportunity zones on the GIS? I will try to do that. I mentioned that my computer wasn't working well, but I'll give it a shot. And I'm gonna, can I stop sharing the screen here? Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing. Or I might need to start again, but can I get to the chat? Yes, I can. All right, here we go, chat. Okay, let's see. Okay, will you show us how to view the opportunity zones on GIS? Yes, I will try. And after I go through the rest of the questions. To build affordable housing, we can also work with the nonprofit Rural Community Housing Development Corporation. Yes, this is true. I've been in touch with them and have had a lot of conversations with potential projects, but again, we're butting up against the lack of appropriately zoned and planned land for that multifamily development. So that's been a stopper. We're working to address that, but it takes time. And certainly they've recently opened a supportive housing or very low income housing project down in South Eureka area on Alpha Street. So that was RCHDC, which is a good partner for development. Are other areas in McKinleyville targeted for development? To some extent, yes. There have been some subdivisions that are going in. There, you may have noticed the roundabout to nowhere on, I believe it's Murray Road. I can't remember which one it is, but anyway, there is going to be a subdivision going in there. The developer ran out of some money to do some of the site work, but I think that's coming. So there is more single family development coming for McKinleyville in that area. And other areas besides McKinleyville targeted for development. Yes, the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors recently approved the North McKay Tract development. That's a Kramer project. It's not subsidized affordable housing at this time, although part of that project does include, I would say, a fairly diverse planned development that includes apartments, ownership, housing, and then also higher end homes. And there may even be some condos in there. I'm not sure, but that's in the Cutton area near the McKay Forest. Other counties donate tax lien properties to nonprofit developers and waive fees to ownership. Has this been considered? We would definitely consider that. I'm not aware of any tax lien properties that we own that would be suitable for development, but we would definitely consider that. But again, there aren't too many of those. Where can I find tiny house regulations for building in unincorporated areas? I'm going to give you a phone number. I hope you have a pen, Lynn. Mary Milliner is a planner, and she's working on that ordinance right now, and she knows more about it than I do. And Mary's name is, or number is 268-3772. And ask about her work on the tiny home ordinance. Okay, let's see. Has the county land use plan been updated, or is it in the process of being revised so that zoning for new residential development will make parcels available? Are you planning for high density development? The county is, as I mentioned, working on our multifamily rezone project, where we're taking land zone for other uses and changing that zoning to multifamily. That's high density residential development apartments. So yes, we are planning for new residential development apartments, but it's time consuming process, and we perhaps haven't allocated enough resources to that. Is there a way to prevent or limit hedge funds from buying homes to flip them and driving up prices? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that the hedge funds are 100% to blame. Certainly in my neighborhood, I've met people that have moved to Humboldt County from Colorado, Texas, Bay Area. So it's not just the hedge funds that are buying them up. It's folks with money coming from elsewhere often. And people that are here are struggling to catch up. Ken says, since Habitat for Humanity closed in the county, are there any NGOs, nonprofits operating? Yeah, Ann Lindsay chimes in, the Rural Housing Development Corporation is. And yeah, thanks for that, Ann. What is the median household size? Median household size is 2.3 persons. So there we go. Darlene says, this has been informative. I appreciate how thorough you were. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Darlene. Darlene is with Arcata House Partnership. They provide a lot of valuable services to people experiencing homelessness, families in the Arcata area. and county has assisted them with developing a night shelter out in Boyd Road. It looks like someone's out on the web GIS, which is great. And let me see if I can get on there and pull up the layers.
Yeah, Andrew, it says it's only viewable by you, by the co-host, so I'm not sure anybody else can see that.
Okay. Yeah, I got to share my screen, but first I have to.
I'll stop.
Sorry, let's see here. Where's my Google machine? There it is. Okay. Yeah, weird. It's Chrome is not responding. I'm going to close. I hope it doesn't shut me out of Zoom, but I'm going to take a chance here. I'm still here. Good. Open. Come on. Okay. We got to sign in. Okay. Uh-oh. All right, now I'm going to share my screen. Share screen. And 2. Okay, share. Okay, so Humboldt County. I got to move this thing over here. That too. Okay, so this is a little bit daunting if you've never done this before. But essentially, we've got the parcel layers, a parcel layer, which shows all the land. I think there's something like 68,000 land parcels in the county. And then we have jurisdiction boundaries and land use here. And this is where you can find your zoning. And general plan land use, which are two different things. Essentially, zoning is what it is now, and general plan is what it is planned to be in the future. But that's a little muddy in terms of the map. And I'm going to look for the housing opportunity zones. But first, I'm going to turn off the parcels. Turn those off. So these little carrots, sometimes whenever you see one, just click on it. And you find a little hidden surprise underneath. Okay, jurisdiction, boundaries. So this is interesting. We have the community service district boundaries. As I mentioned, infrastructure is a key factor in any development decision. Some of them provide wastewater and some of them just provide water. Some of them, so, you know, Willow Creek, they don't have community sewer, but they do provide water. Fieldbrook, again, I'm not sure if they have wastewater out there, but they do provide water. McKinleyville has sewer and water. Manila, they have a sewer treatment system. Samoa recently has made a significant investment in a wastewater treatment system. You know, that's the historic town of Samoa. There's 100+ homes that were built in the early 1900s to house the people that worked at the mill down there. And their sewer treatment system was essentially a giant pit filled with redwood bark. So they were operating that up until a few years ago. Recently, they've put a more modern system together, and they're using the ocean outfall pipe, which has been in the news quite a bit, because that's where the new fiber connection comes in from Singapore, where that cable lands. But they're also using it to discharge treated wastewater from Samoa. And I'm getting sidetracked. I'm going to go back to the question about housing and housing opportunity zones. So the housing opportunity zones are in this kind of greenish yellow color. And I'm going to turn off this one just to kind of keep it simple. And so zooming in a little bit, the shaded areas are the housing opportunity zones, areas that are served by existing infrastructure. So we have Cutton. This is, I don't know, Pine Hill, I think they call that area. But you might think it's part of Eureka, but it's actually in the unincorporated county. And then this area down here is the city of Eureka. And I have my suspicions that back in the day, they said, we want a high-end residential development. So they went and annexed this portion of the county and created Lombard Hills, which is I don't know, it's not high-end, but it's a bigger homes. Coming down here, this is Humboldt Hill. Zooming out, we can go down to, is there anything in Lolita? No, Lolita, I thought they had a service district, but I think it must only be water. Scotia has community water, but again, like Samoa, it's already pretty much developed as a historic logging town. Going south, we get down to Miranda. They are actually sewered and have water. And then Redway, Garberville, same thing. And that's as far south as we'll go. And we go up to Willow Creek and see if they're in the opportunity zone. I don't think they are. Where are they? They're Sawyer. Yep. So Willow Creek is not part of the housing opportunity zone because they do not have sewer out there. McKinleyville, yes, that is part of the housing opportunity zone. So, you know, you would think we've got an area here that's the size of Connecticut. We should have plenty of places to put homes, but really it's quite limited. And I think for the good of the planet, we really need to focus our development in areas where we've already developed things to kind of preserve our miraculous redwoods and ecosystems and so on. I'm going to go back to the chat and see if I got any questions. We're closing in on our end of the presentation. Okay, Bonnie McGregor. Let's see, where's my last? Okay, let's see. Web, yes. All right. Okay, whoops. Patricia Ann called me on the median average, and I would have to look into that, Patricia Ann. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's right around 2.3, and I'm not sure if that's the median or the average. Yep. So this is the web GIS. If you want to find this, just Google Humboldt County internal or Humboldt County web GIS, and it should come up. Where do I begin to report and get housing services for my 91-year-old aunt whose house went off her foundation in Tompkins Hill above Fortuna in December 20th is no longer livable? So they could call, or you could call Kristen Martinique is her name. Her phone number is 707-267-9402. And she would be the contact for our owner occupied rehabilitation program. If she wants to try to rehab her home, it may make sense for her to get on the waiting list, and it all depends on her income level. But she may want to get on the waiting list for one of the senior projects. There is one in Fortuna, which might be a good fit for her. I've been there. It's not a bad place. And it's essentially an apartment complex with all seniors. That would be contact Danco Communities and get on the waiting list. So that would be what I could say for that one. McKinleyville has a community plan that's currently in place. can the county override the community plan without first going? No, they need a process to do that. And that process has been going on for 3 years. And certainly, there's some divergent voices about what the town center of McKinleyville should look at like. Not everyone is agreeable to having a high density residential development there. Let's see. Is that it? I think that's
I
it.
think that's it. Andrew, you've done a fantastic job. Thank you ever so much. This has been very informative. And I think we've caught all the questions in the chat. Is there anybody else who has a question that they want to raise? If so, say now or forever hold your peace, or at least until the next opportunity. So I want to thank you again, Andrew, and let everybody know that on April 24th, next Monday, we're going to be talking about the Humboldt County cannabis industry with Cliff Johnson and Natalie Dept. And that should be very interesting. There's been a lot of information in the newspapers of late about how it's having all kinds of problems. And this is from the point of view of the county and what's happening in permitting, and also Natalie is also from the industry. So it should be very interesting to you all. So thank you so much for coming. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Take
Bye,
care.
thanks. Stop.
You got lots of thanks on the chat.